So recently, we opened up one of our portfolios and you guys saw $2 million in that portfolio. And in that video, we talked about this idea of borrowing against those assets by getting a securities-backed line of credit. Well, we decided not to borrow against those assets, but we decided to not do it for several reasons that are particular to our situation. But this strategy of borrowing against your investment accounts is something that I want to share with you guys because for some of you, this may be the avenue that you want to pursue instead of selling those assets in order to make a big purchase. You see, because if you have made a lot of money in the stock market like we have, if you go to sell your stocks, your bonds, your index funds, your ETFs, you will be paying capital gains tax on those investments. But there is a way to avoid paying those taxes by taking out a loan against those assets instead. Hey guys, it's Aman from Our Rich Journey, and on today's video, I am talking about security-backed line of credit. Now, if you've never heard of this before, it's similar to what a home equity line of credit is, where you have an asset like a house, for example, and you borrow against the equity in your home in order to make another purchase, in order to do upgrades, take a vacation, pay off debt. Whatever the case may be, if you own a home and you have equity in that home, you can get a home equity line of credit or you can do a cash out refinance. Well, there's also another way to borrow against your assets, and it is against your investment assets in the stock market. So if you have a regular brokerage account, there is a way that you can borrow from those brokerage accounts. And this is something that Christina and I recently explored because we are considering buying another house here in Portugal, and we are looking at different ways to finance that purchase instead of paying cash. Now, in the past, what we would do is we would sell some of our assets in order to make a big purchase. But our stocks, ETFs, and index funds have appreciated significantly to the point that if we sold them now, we would be hit with a hefty tax bill. And so one of the things that we have been considering is getting a line of credit against our investment portfolios. And so I want to talk to you guys a bit about this strategy because lots of wealthy people use this strategy every single day to pay for their costs of living. But before I go any further, I want to back up a little bit to talk about a strategy called buy, borrow, and die. If you've never heard of this, it's something that wealthy people have done for generations and generations in order to avoid paying taxes on all of their assets. So on their homes, on their brokerage accounts, on the artwork or memorabilia, whatever asset that they have bought at one price that has appreciated, in order to avoid paying taxes on that asset that they have bought, instead of selling it, they borrow against those assets. Now, in lots of cases, the borrowing that they're doing against those assets, they are actually borrowing to invest in other assets to continue to grow their wealth. And what eventually happens, and this is the most powerful part of this whole strategy, is that when that wealthy person passes away, they pass those assets on to their heirs. And because of the tax code, their heirs get a new step up in basis and don't have to pay taxes on that inherited asset. Now, I know I just said a lot, but I'm going to slow it down. So essentially, the process works like this. Step one, the person buys the asset. So it can be stocks, bonds, real estate, art, or other high value assets. Now, the person holds these assets and allows these assets to grow. Step two is the person borrows against these assets. And they can use that borrowed money to pay for everyday expenses or to buy other assets. But because they are borrowing against these assets and not selling these assets, they don't pay taxes on the capital gains of those assets. And so wealthy people with assets have access to cash whenever they need it because they have this ability to borrow against their assets. And this brings us to the third step, the die and pass assets on to your heirs. And what's so powerful is that federal and local tax laws do not require heirs to pay on the growth in value of those assets to that point. In fact, the tax code wipes out any tax liability for the capital gains by stepping up the baseline value of the assets from the original price to their value at the time of that wealthy person's death. So essentially, this enables wealthy families to avoid paying taxes on the growth of their wealth from generation to generation. Now, it's important to understand the buy, borrow, die strategy in order to understand why we would strategically borrow against our investment portfolios instead of selling our assets to make a significant purchase. Now, there are other assets like real estate that we could borrow against with a home equity line of credit, but I want to focus on our investment portfolio because we have a significant amount of wealth in our investment portfolios and we have earned a significant amount of capital gains in those portfolios. So one quick note, if you guys are interested in seeing how we invested for financial independence and actually how we are investing right now, check out our stock market investing course for financial independence. It's a 4-hour course that dives deep into the strategies that we used to invest in the stock market for financial independence and to retire early. So now let's get back to borrowing against your investment portfolios. The way that you do it is with something called a security-backed line of credit. So a securities-backed line of credit, or an S-block, is a form of lending where you pledge your investment portfolio as collateral. By using the securities within your brokerage accounts, individuals can access funds while retaining their investments. And here's an explanation of how it works and some frequently asked questions. First, let's talk about the limits on borrowing. So the line of credit amount is limited by the value of the pledged assets along with the lender imposed restrictions. Now, the minimum amount required at a lot of financial institutions is $100,000. The maximum amount that you can borrow is always determined by the value of assets used as collateral. Some people have extremely high balances in their brokerage accounts and they can borrow up to 80-90% of the value within their portfolios. But the amount that they are able to borrow is usually a percentage of their total portfolio that they have pledged. As far as permissible uses, so what can you use the borrowed money for? So essentially, you can use the money for tuitions, weddings, large purchases, vacations, real estate deals. These funds can be used for a number of things, but one thing that they say that you cannot use these funds for is to buy investments like stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. So because you are borrowing this money, you have to pay interest on the amount of money that you borrow at any given time. Similar to a home equity line of credit. Whatever you borrow, that money that is out being borrowed, you are going to pay interest on that. One thing about these lines of credit is that you are not borrowing the money from your brokerage account. In fact, your brokerage account is connecting you with another bank, a lender that you are actually going to be borrowing the money from. So in the case of Fidelity, Fidelity acts like a facilitator for the S-block, helping clients pledge their collateral while the actual loan is managed by a partner bank like US Bank or Leader Bank. These banks handle all communications, terms, and repayments. And so what about fees? Well, this is one of the things that makes this type of borrowing very attractive. You see, there are no setup fees, no origination fees, and there are no annual fees associated with establishing an S-block. So let's talk about what investments are eligible for S-blocks. So you can't borrow from retirement accounts like a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, or a 401k. The accounts that you can borrow against are just a normal brokerage account. And the eligible assets within those brokerage accounts can be individual stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, or cash held within core positions. Also keep in mind that assets held on margin cannot be borrowed against. So what is the required financial documentation in order to qualify for this line of credit? Generally, additional financing documentation isn't required. Some specific assets may require extra documentation to aid in the lending decision, but usually The lending institution looks at the assets that you have at the bank and they don't ask for any other financial documentations from you. They may not even run a credit check. They don't need statements from a W-2. They look at what you have in those portfolios and they will use the assets within those portfolios as collateral for that loan. And this brings me to a very important aspect about these loans. Earlier, you heard me say that you have to pledge this money to the financial institution. So the money that you are borrowing from these lenders, if you take out these line of credits, they take control of your brokerage account. And it's because of this that they don't need to look at any other financial documentation to help you qualify for these line of credits because they are in control of the collateral. And this is what makes qualifying for an SBLOC loan relatively straightforward and not as stringent as qualifying for a home equity line of credit. So in essence, the SBLOC is quick, it's efficient, it is a fast way to access money without having to sell your assets. Now, lots of wealthy investors love SBLOCs, and there are three major reasons why they love this line of credit. The first is the tax benefit. By using the line of credit instead of selling investments, investors avoid triggering capital gains taxes. The second thing is it allows investors to maintain their market positions, meaning you can stay fully invested without selling, letting your portfolio continue to grow while accessing cash for immediate needs. And the last thing that they love about it are the flexible repayment plans. You see, you can draw only what you need, allowing you the flexibility of managing your repayments. And those repayments do not require you to pay down the principal. You can pay interest only on these lines of credit. So all of these pros may sound very, very enticing. And for certain people, they have an appeal that makes them want to get these loans. But for us, there are some major cons that stopped us from moving forward with our SBLOC application. You see, after we received the contract from the lending institution, we realized that there were some major drawbacks. And here are 5 specific ones that we did not like about the SBLOC. The first is the excessive control. You see, by pledging our entire investment portfolio, the bank gains significant control over our assets. We would need their approval for any changes in our account. And this restriction even applies even if we don't end up borrowing the line of credit. As soon as we open up this line of credit, even without accessing it, we hand over control to the lending institution. The second con is the high interest rate. The interest rate that we were quoted for the amount of money that we wanted to pledge was 8.3%. In our mind, an 8.3 interest rate is just too high. The next con was that because we were using this money to buy a property here in Portugal, we would have to take this money out for a longer period of time in order to really reap the benefit of accessing this line of credit. And so this would give us a longer time frame for having to borrow this money, which would expose us to more risk by not having access and control over our investment accounts. The next con is the conflict of interest that is built in with this relationship that lies between the brokerage and the lender. In our mind, there is a conflict of interest because Fidelity earns a commission by referring clients to certain banks. While it's understandable that Fidelity needs to make money, we found that this particular relationship that they had with this bank didn't provide the most competitive rates. We looked at other brokerages that also have similar lines of credit, and we found that other brokerages actually had rates and conditions that were more competitive. And the last reason why we didn't consider the line of credit is there are better alternatives to borrowing money. There are traditional loans or there are other lines of credits that offer a lower interest rate and greater control over the asset that we are putting up for collateral. And so the SBLOC for us was not the strategy that we were going to use at this particular time. But let's go back to this whole idea of buy, borrow, die, and pass on assets. This is something that I think everyone, no matter what your financial situation is right now, should be aware of. Because having this knowledge of how to grow your wealth and pass on your wealth is so important when it comes to building your financial independence plan and your estate plan. And so I wanted to share our experience in this video with you because I'm sure this information will help you on your journey at some point or another. And so if you like this video, if it's giving you food for thought, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and join the journey.